When Portuguese sailors first dropped anchor off the West African coast in 1471, they weren't prepared for what they were about to see. They had sailed thousands of miles expecting to find primitive villages, maybe some gold to trade, perhaps some stories to tell back home about exotic lands. What they found instead was something that would haunt European powers for the next 4 centuries. They found a kingdom with paved streets wider than anything in Lisbon. They found a 4-story palace that dwarfed the royal residences of Europe. They found walls so massive, so impossibly long, that they would later be measured at 4 times the length of the Great Wall of China. The king wore silk and gold. His army numbered over 100,000 soldiers. His bronze workers created art so sophisticated that European museums would later refuse to believe Africans made it. So the Portuguese did what empires do best when confronted with a truth that threatens their entire worldview. They smiled, they traded, they took notes, and then, over the next 400 years, they worked with every other European power to systematically erase this kingdom from history. They burned it, they looted it, they rewrote the maps, and then they taught your grandparents and your parents and you that it never existed at all. This is the story of the Benin Empire, and this is the story of the greatest theft in human history. The year is 1485, and a Portuguese trader named João Afonso de Aveiro has just returned from the coast of West Africa. He's writing a letter to his king, and his hands are shaking. Not from fear, but from something closer to disbelief. He describes a city he calls Great Benin, with streets so wide that multiple carriages can pass side by side. He describes the king's palace as being as large as the entire city of Haarlem in the Netherlands, with galleries and rooms decorated with polished palm leaves that shine like marble. He describes metalworkers creating bronze sculptures using a lost wax casting technique so advanced that Portuguese artisans don't even understand how it works. He describes a kingdom that controls trade routes stretching from the Atlantic coast deep into Central Africa, a kingdom wealthy beyond European imagination, a kingdom with a sophisticated bureaucracy, standing army, and diplomatic corps. But here's the thing that de Aveiro doesn't write in his letter, the thing he perhaps doesn't even consciously realize yet. This discovery is a problem, a massive, civilization-threatening problem. Because in 1485, Europe is in the business of slavery. The Portuguese have already begun capturing Africans from coastal regions, shipping them across the Atlantic to work sugar plantations. And the entire economic and moral justification for this industry rests on one crucial lie: that Africans are primitive, incapable of civilization, barely human. It's a lie they tell themselves to sleep at night. It's a lie they teach in churches to get God's blessing. It's a lie they write into law to make it all legal. But the Benin Empire doesn't just challenge this lie. It demolishes it. If word gets out that there's a black civilization in Africa that rivals or surpasses European kingdoms in wealth, organization, and artistic achievement, the entire justification for slavery collapses. If Africans can build cities like this, create art like this, organize societies like this, then what right does Europe have to enslave them? So a decision is made, not in any single room or by any single person, but collectively, systematically, over decades and then centuries. The decision is this: trade with them for now. Learn everything you can about them. And when the time is right, destroy all evidence that they ever existed. For the next 400 years, this is exactly what happens. European powers trade with Benin, importing pepper, ivory, and palm oil. They establish diplomatic relationships. Portuguese missionaries visit the court. Dutch merchants set up trading posts. British delegations are received by Benin's kings, the Obas, with all the ceremony due to foreign dignitaries. But all the while, something insidious is happening on European maps and in European books. In the 1500s, maps show the Benin Empire clearly, labeled and acknowledged. By the 1600s, the labels start to shrink. By the 1700s, the interior of Africa on European maps becomes blank space, filled with drawings of elephants and lions and the words terra incognita, unknown land. It's not unknown. Europeans have been trading there for 2 centuries. But calling it unknown serves a purpose. Unknown means uncivilized. Unknown means available for taking. And then comes the pseudoscience. In the 1700s and 1800s, European academics invent what they call scientific racism. They measure skulls. They create hierarchies of human races. They publish papers and books claiming to prove, with charts and numbers and Latin terminology, that black Africans are intellectually inferior, incapable of creating complex societies, destined by nature to be servants. Every university teaches it. Every textbook prints it. Every church preaches a version of it. And crucially, any evidence to the contrary is either ignored, explained away, or attributed to outside influence. Arab traders must have built that. The Portuguese must have helped with that. Those bronze sculptures are probably not even African. This is the trap, the catch-22 that makes erasure possible. The evidence of African civilization is hidden or destroyed, and then the lack of evidence is used as proof that the civilization never existed. But the Benin Empire doesn't disappear quietly. For 4.5 centuries, from the 1440s to 1897, Benin resists European encroachment. The great Oba Ewar expands the empire and builds the legendary walls, earthen fortifications so massive that their construction would have required 150 million hours of labor. That's more labor than building the pyramids of Egypt. These walls aren't just defensive structures. They're a statement. They say, we are powerful, we are organized, and we are here to stay. Benin maintains its independence through military strength, diplomatic skill, and economic control. Unlike some coastal kingdoms that collaborate with European slave traders, selling captured enemies and criminals into bondage, Benin largely refuses to participate in the slave trade. The Obas know that selling your own people weakens your kingdom from within. They've seen what happens to societies that do, so they say no. And this refusal, this resistance, makes them a target. By the 1890s, the situation has reached a breaking point. The Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885 has carved up Africa on paper, European powers drawing borders on maps with rulers and pencils, dividing an entire continent among themselves without a single African present in the room. The British have claimed the region that includes Benin. There's just one problem. Benin doesn't recognize British authority and shows no interest in becoming a colony. The British demand free trade, which is colonial code for give us access to all your resources and accept our political control. Oba Ovon Ramwen, the ruler of Benin, refuses. This is his kingdom. These are his people. He will not surrender sovereignty to foreign invaders. The British send delegations. They make threats. They apply economic pressure. Nothing works. So they wait for an excuse. It comes in January 1897. A British delegation, led by Acting Consul General James Phillips, decides to visit Benin City during the annual Egg Festival, a sacred time when the city is closed to outsiders, and the Oba is performing religious rituals crucial to the kingdom's spiritual well-being. They're warned not to come. Messages are sent explaining that this is not the time, that they will be received later with all proper ceremony. but that they absolutely cannot come during the festival. Phillips ignores the warnings. He believes British power makes him immune to local customs. He's wrong. When the delegation approaches Benin City, they're ambushed. 7 British officers are killed. It's never been entirely clear whether this was sanctioned by the Oba or carried out by commanders who believed the British were planning an invasion. Evidence suggests Benin had intelligence about British military preparations. What's certain is that the ambush gives the British Empire exactly what it wanted: a justification for war. The response is immediate and overwhelming. The British organize what they call a punitive expedition, which is colonial doublespeak for a massacre. In February 1897, 1,200 British soldiers armed with Maxim guns, the machine guns of the era, invade Benin. The kingdom's warriors fight with courage, but they're outgunned, literally. Spears and swords against rapid-fire weapons. The British cut through Benin's defenses in 10 days. Thousands of Benin citizens are killed. The exact number is never recorded because the British don't bother to count. But what happens next is even worse than the killing. It's the erasure. British soldiers enter the royal palace and begin the most systematic looting in African history. They take over 2,000 bronze sculptures, each one a masterpiece of metalwork. They take ivory carvings that have been in the royal collection for generations. They take gold artifacts, ceremonial objects, historical records. Anything that can be carried is carried. Anything too heavy to move is destroyed. The royal library, which contains the written and oral history of the kingdom, is burned. British soldiers set fire to the palace and then to the city itself. For 3 days, Benin burns. A British officer writes in his diary, with satisfaction, that the city burned beautifully. Oba Ovonramwen is captured and sent into exile, where he dies 6 years later, a broken man separated from his kingdom and his people. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. The bronze sculptures that the British stole present an immediate problem. They're too good. The artistry is too sophisticated. The technical skill required to create them is too advanced. European museums and art collectors look at these sculptures and they can't reconcile what they're seeing with what they've been taught about African primitivism. The sculptures show faces with individual expressions, clothing with intricate detail, historical events captured with narrative sophistication. The lost wax bronze casting technique used to create them is more advanced than what most European bronze workers are using in the 1890s. So the lie evolves. British museum curators begin claiming that the bronzes were probably made with Portuguese help, or that they were influenced by European art, or that perhaps they were created by lost Roman colonists or Arab traders. Anything but admit the obvious truth, that black African artists in the 1300s and 1400s, centuries before significant European contact, created these masterpieces. The sculptures are labeled primitive art, despite their obvious sophistication. They're sold to museums worldwide for a fraction of their value, and the city they came from is written out of history. For decades, this erasure is nearly complete. History textbooks in Europe and America either don't mention Benin or describe it as a minor tribal kingdom. When the walls are mentioned at all, they're called mysterious, and archaeologists speculate they might have been built by a lost civilization. Not the Benin Empire, which definitely built them, but some other unspecified group, because surely Africans couldn't have managed such an engineering feat. This is the pattern of colonial archaeology. When you find something impressive in Africa, assume anyone but Africans built it. But walls buried under jungle and lies buried under propaganda have one thing in common. Eventually, they get uncovered. In the 1960s, Archaeologists actually measure the Benin walls with modern equipment. The numbers are staggering. 16,000 kilometers of earthen fortifications, 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China. The engineering expertise required to plan and build such a structure implies a sophisticated understanding of mathematics, labor organization, and defensive strategy. There's no explaining this away. Carbon dating on the Benin bronzes confirms they were created by African artists in the 1300s and 1400s, long before significant European contact. Portuguese records, hidden in archives in Lisbon, are rediscovered, confirming everything de Vero wrote in 1485 about Benin's wealth and sophistication. X-rays and metallurgical studies prove that Benin's bronze workers developed casting techniques that Europe didn't have. The evidence becomes overwhelming, undeniable. But museums still won't return the stolen art. To this day, over 5,000 Benin artifacts sit in museums across Europe and America. The British Museum alone holds more than 900 pieces. Nigeria has repeatedly requested their return. The requests are denied. The excuse is always the same. We're preserving them for the world. But what they're really saying is, we're keeping our stolen goods. Because returning the Benin bronzes means admitting they were stolen. And admitting they were stolen means admitting the massacre was a crime. And admitting the massacre was a crime means admitting colonialism was a system of theft backed by violence. And that admission, even now, 127 years later, is too threatening to the way Europe and America tell their own histories. This is why the lie matters. This isn't just about art in museums or walls in the jungle. It's about power in the present. If African civilizations were sophisticated and wealthy, if they built cities and created art and organized complex societies, then the entire narrative of Western superiority collapses. The justification for colonialism, the white man's burden, the civilizing mission, is exposed as propaganda. And if colonialism is exposed as theft, then questions arise about reparations, about restitution, about who owes what to whom. This is why most history textbooks still don't mention the Benin Empire. When they do mention it, it's called a tribe, not an empire, minimizing its power. The same treatment is given to Great Zimbabwe, to the Kingdom of Congo, to the Songhai Empire, to Aksum, to Kanem Bornu. An entire continent's worth of civilizations erased or minimized, so that the lie can continue. But here's what they couldn't destroy. The walls still stand in Benin City, overgrown but undeniable. The art survived in museum basements, beautiful despite being stolen. The oral histories passed down through generations, kept alive by people who knew the truth, even when the world wouldn't listen. The archaeological evidence, the Portuguese records, the carbon dating, the metallurgical analysis, all of it telling the same story. They lied, they stole, they erased, but they didn't win. When you erase a people's history, you don't just steal their past, you steal their future. Every African child who grows up believing their ancestors built nothing has had their inheritance stolen. Every museum with stolen African art is a crime scene with the evidence on display. Every history book that ignores African empires is propaganda dressed as education. The greatest theft in history wasn't just gold and bronze sculptures, it was truth itself. They didn't just steal crowns from African kings. They stole the memory that the kings ever existed. But memory, like walls buried under jungle, can be excavated. And once you see it, once you really see it, you can never unsee it. The lie unravels, the truth emerges, and history, real history, not the version written by thieves and conquerors, demands to be told. This is why they worked so hard to hide the Benin Empire. Not because it was primitive, but because it was proof. Proof that everything they taught was wrong. Proof that the civilizations they destroyed were not inferior, but competition. Proof that history isn't written by the victors, it's written by the thieves. And it's time, long past time, to take it back.